Hey, what's going on everyone? It's Evil Monkey here, back with another build video. This one's for a DPS Yujin turret build, and I have to say I've been having a blast with this one. It's a lot of fun. It's exactly what I've always wanted with a summoner slash turret build, especially in First Descendant, where it is a perfect mesh between you using your turret slash summon, and you also doing a lot of things such as more damage, debuff, and buffing. I feel like not a lot of games actually succeed at this. Usually with summoner classes, it's either your summon does everything, and you as the character or the player do absolutely nothing, and you just AFK while your summon does everything. Or in the other instance, the summon does absolutely nothing, and you as the character have to do everything, and at that point, why are you playing a summoner class? This one struck the ultimate balance between the two. I feel like I'm having my turret do a lot, but me as a player, I'm also doing a lot. And it's just the perfect balance. Now, if you guys don't know what transient mod I'm talking about, it's Combat Protocol. I'll go ahead and throw it up on screen there. If you don't know what it does, go ahead and pause and read that. But this build has been so much fun, and the other really good thing about this build is we're hitting max cooldown and max range while still maintaining a high DPS and an insane amount of wave clear. Now, before we get into the actual build itself, though, I do want to say there is a really weird interaction with Yujin's first ability in this build, the turret summoning ability. And if you don't know about this interaction, you'll lose a lot of your DPS, in all honesty, probably about 50% of your DPS. And I go over this interaction in the tips and tricks section, so I really advise you guys to watch that tips and tricks section to know that interaction and how to use it to get your highest amount of DPS. So as always, we gotta start off with our mod section. Now I'll go ahead and break down each mod we're running here and explain why we're running it and how we're able to achieve such high damage while being able to hit max cooldown and max range. Now for our first group of mods we'll go over here is our range modules. Now I'll be running two here, with the first one being skill expansion. We're running this one because it's just your basic range increase and it has no downsides, and it does give you a lot of range up. The second one we'll be running is amplification control, and the reason why we're running this one is even though it doesn't give the most range, it gives us enough to be able to hit max range, which is something we're going to want to hit, and it has no downside. So we want to run this over maximize range because maximize range will, like I said, overcap us on range by a large margin, and also has the downside of taking away some skill modifier, which we will also want to avoid. Now, the reason why we're running so much range in this build actually has to do with Yujin's first ability, which increases its target count for every 65% increase in range beyond the base. Meaning, if you want to hit the max amount of targets that you can hit at once, you actually want about 195% additional range, and at that point, you're just going to get the capped out range at the additional 200%, which will bring you up to, with the base range, 300% range. And you're going to want to do this once again just to maximize your wave clear, because it will maximize the amount of targets your turret can hit when you summon it. Also, as a side note, we'll talk about this more in the Ancestor module section, but if you do roll enough skill range up in your Ancestor module, you could actually remove amplification control and instead make that a free slot for whatever module you want. I actually do have a different Ancestor module I run sometimes that gives that, and I just run an ultimate module in that slot. For our next group of mods, we're going to go over our HP modules. Now for this one, we're going to be running two. First one being increased HP, because it's just your basic HP increase module. Gives you a lot with no downside. And for our second one, we're going to run Stim Accelerant. Now, the reason we're running this one is because number one, it does give you a lot of HP, and the only downside it gives is minus max MP. And it turns out for this build, most of Yujin's cost is going to be HP instead of MP, so having a reduction in MP doesn't really matter, because you will never actually run out of MP. Probably you won't even go below half MP. Now, there are two main reasons that we're running a lot of HP here. The first one, as I already said, all of Yujin's skills use mainly HP as the resource instead of MP, meaning you want a lot of HP so you can remain alive, so you don't just have one ability use like 10% of your HP and you're already in one-shot range. Having a lot of HP will make you a lot tankier so you can survive a lot easier. And the second reason, which is probably by and far the biggest reason, is Yujin's passive, for every 5,000 HP, you get 10% cooldown. Meaning Yujin can very easily hit the max cooldown rate of 90%. And for this build, our goal is to hit 20,000 HP to get 40% cooldown, which mixed this with everything else running cooldown wise, will very easily get you to 90% cooldown. We'll go more over that when we talk about the other things that will give us cooldown. And now for our skill power section, we're going to be running 4 different modules here. The first one being focus on non-attribute, and the reason we're running this one is because Yujin is a non-attribute character, and we want that cooldown to be able to hit the max cooldown of 90%. Similar logic, we're also running focus on fusion because we want the cooldown, and then Yujin is a fusion character with all his abilities actually scaling off fusion with this module of Combat Protocol. Then we're also going to run non-attribute amplification. Now this is because Yujin is not really a crit character, even though some of his skills do actually work with crit. His base stats are pretty awful for crit, and the other reason that we don't want to run crit, outside of his base stats just being awful for it, is you'd have to actually add 2 more modules into this build to somehow get 4 crit modules. And that begs the question of what you remove, the range, the HP, but if you remove any of those, you lose damage somewhere else. So it's just honestly better to just run non-crit. Yujin scales better with that, and you don't have to worry about messing with the mods to fit in 2 new crit modules. And then similar logic of why we're running fusion application. Once again, Yujin is a fusion character with all of his abilities scaling off fusion, and we're not going to be running crit because of the horrible scaling, and it just doesn't really fit in with these modules to be able to run max range and max cooldown. And finally, time for our cooldown section. Something we've kind of been talking about a lot with the mods, but it turns out because of all the other cooldown that we're getting from all the other mods, and from Yujin's passive, we only actually have to run 1 cooldown mod here, and that's MP conversion. Now we're running MP conversion because it gives you the most cooldown for any module in the game, and also the only downside is it takes away from max MP, which, as was stated earlier in the build, we really don't care about because most of your cost in this build is actually going to be your HP. So reducing your max MP a little bit doesn't actually matter. Now, the question may actually be though in everyone's mind, why do we want to run max cooldown here? And while it does help with pretty much all of your abilities, the main reason is actually your 4th ability, because your 4th ability gives 2 huge benefits. The first one is it buffs you a lot, and the 2 massive buffs it gives are it gives you movement speed and skill power. It gives you other buffs as well, but those are the 2 big ones we're most interested in. And without the cooldown, this ability would be on something like 110-second cooldown, and we bring it down to 11-second cooldown with the buff only being 15 seconds. While some people may be thinking, isn't that overkill because we're 4 seconds under the cooldown? You'd think that, but not really, because of the other benefit we get, which is Yujin's 4th ability also gives you an 80% max HP heal. That's right, every 11 seconds you just basically full heal yourself. And that's really important because once again, all of your abilities pretty much consume HP, and with all the enemies also hitting at the same time, you really want the heal to just be able to heal yourself every 11 seconds. This is going to allow you to be a lot tankier and be able to keep up your abilities going continuously. And that's the main reason that we want so much cooldown in this build, is just so we can spam out your 4th ability as much as we possibly can. Now for your Ancestor module, we'll be covering that in a different section of the video, so if you guys want to jump to that, there is a timestamp in the timeline of the video, and one also in the description, and we'll fully cover the Ancestor module in that section. And now for the trigger modules of the build. For this one, my recommended one is Cyclic Amplifier, and that may sound odd to a lot of people, but there is a very good explanation behind it. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what Cyclic Amplifier does, every 5 seconds, the trigger module will rotate through giving you a buff of a certain skill power type. It'll rotate through Fusion, Dimension, Tech, and Singular. And every 5 seconds it'll rotate to giving you a new one. Now, the reason that we're able to utilize this trigger module actually has to do with something I said towards the beginning of the video relating to Yujin's first ability. I recommend you guys going and watching the tips and tricks section of this video to get an explanation on it. And I still recommend going to watch that for a more in-depth explanation. But the quick version of it is every time Yujin activates his first ability for the drone, it actually copies all your stats and uses that throughout the entire duration of the ability. No matter how long it goes, whether it goes for 10 seconds, 10 minutes, 10 hours, it doesn't matter. As long as that ability is still going, it will use that initial copy of all your values. And it doesn't matter if your stats change at all, it will only use that initial one. So if you go to 0 skill power, it doesn't matter, it will still use that first set of skill power that you use. If you increase it to 10,000% higher, it doesn't matter, still uses that initial one at the activation of the ability. And will not change until you deactivate and reactivate the ability, and when you reactivate it, it will copy whatever your skill power is at the reactivation of the ability. Meaning something like Cyclic Amplifier, which has a 5-second duration of giving us plus 41% additive skill power, you can just activate the ability during that. In fact, because we're running max cooldown rate in this build, you can just very easily deactivate the drone and reactivate it, and it will copy that increased fusion skill power, giving you a lot of increased damage. Now, there is another trigger module you can run here. If you don't have to deal with the cycling skill power, you can run Power Beyond instead, which effectively does the same thing we're doing with Cyclic Amplifier, but instead is more consistent, but has the downside of, instead of getting 41% additive skill power, you only get 15%, which is a large downgrade in damage for your first ability. But the other benefit of Power Beyond is you can more consistently use it with your third ability. But most of our damage will be coming from our drone, so it's more optimized to use Cyclic Amplifier here. Also, as a side note, do not run Death by 1,000 Cuts. That module does not do anything with this build. Even though it shows that it can be used on the first and second ability, it takes way too long to stack. And for the first ability to be able to utilize it, you would have to do something like activating it and deactivating it and activating it again to keep getting the stacks up, which is not effective for this build. So the best ones, Cyclic Amplifier, then Power Beyond's okay, and avoid Death by 1,000 Cuts. And now it's time to move on to our Ancestor module. Now, since I do believe it's almost impossible to get a perfect Ancestor module, what we'll be doing for this section is we'll be taking every modifier you can get on an Ancestor module and putting it into a tier chart. And then you guys can use this tier chart to determine if the Ancestor module you rolled is good or if you want to re-roll it. Now, starting off with S tier, we have Fusion Skill Modifier, Fusion Skill Power Boost Ratio, and Non-Attribute Skill Power Boost Ratio. And this is once again because Yujin is a fusion non-attribute character, and this just increases all of his damage. And as I've said in previous videos, damage is king currently in First Descendant, so getting more damage is definitely just your best stat. For A tier, which is still a really good tier, we're going to start off with Skill Effect Range. Now, this one I actually did consider putting in S tier because, as I said in the mod section, if you roll a high enough stat value in this, you can actually replace one of the range mods in this Yujin build, which gives you a free mod slot. Meaning you can put something like an ultimate module or pretty much whatever you really want in that slot. That's why this is actually a really good tier, but I just didn't feel like this was as good as skill power modifiers that you could get. So instead we moved this down to A tier. And after this one, we also have max HP in A tier. Now, this is just because this is a really good effective stat on Yujin. There's nothing that this is really going to change if you roll this stat. It's just because Yujin uses HP as his consumable stat, meaning all of his abilities use this. And since you have a 80% max HP heal on your fourth ability, getting more HP just overall makes you tankier, and it makes your health drain a little bit more effective. So you don't just go down to almost 0 HP, which normally you won't go to that either way, but more HP does help with that value. Then for the middle packed values, which is our B tier, we're going to have skill cooldown. Now, skill cooldown doesn't really do much because we actually do hit max cooldown, but if you roll this stat, you can actually remove some of the cooldown in other places, such as your reactor. Instead, you can run double skill power in your reactor, or you can change out one of the focus on modules just for the more common version of it, which just will give you more either fusion modifier or non-attribute skill power. This is only a slight increase, that's why this is in B tier, because it doesn't actually affect the build too much damage-wise, but it's just a little bit extra damage you could eke out. And then defense is our other one. It's just because you run a lot of HP, so defense becomes even more effective in this build. But because of core components, you often already have enough defense, but this just, once again, helps you be a little bit beefier. And next up is C tier. Now, C tier is this weird tier where you don't really want these skills as positive or negative value. It's kind of a gray area. You just don't want these at all because they don't help the build. They also, you don't want to take them as a negative value because if you do, it'll hurt the build. So it's just kind of this weird area where you just don't want these skills at all anywhere on your Ancestor module. And the first one of those is skill duration up. This is because we're running max cooldown, and this allows us to already keep up with the durations of all of our buffs and debuffs with how the skills go on cooldown. Now, even if you actually did have slightly less duration, you probably could still keep up with all of your buffs and your debuffs, or at least most of them. But this makes the build feel a lot worse, so you don't actually want to do that. And then the other one is skill cost. Now, this one I almost considered putting in D tier, but I decided to put in C tier because when you actually do get skill cost, it increases your HP consumption since that is your resource Yujin is using. And you really don't want to increase the drain on your HP because this will make you a lot squishier and will potentially bring you down to 1 HP, which we want to avoid. But you also don't want improved skill costs here because if you reduce the amount of HP you consume, you actually end up with less skill power. And this is because when the Mutant Cells will be running, will give you increased skill power based off your missing HP. So really, you just don't want this value at all. And finally, time for D tier. Now, D tier, this is a tier that you do not want to take any of these values as positive values because they do not help the build at all. But they're perfect to take as your negative values because even taking them as negative values does not hurt the build at all because it doesn't affect any of the things you're actually using. And the first two values we're going to go over here are singular skill power boost ratio and singular skill modifier. Now this is because, as I said before, Yujin's a fusion character, and these stats do nothing. They don't affect any of your abilities because they all scale off fusion. And then our next two stats are skill critical hit rate and skill critical hit damage. And this is because, as we said in the mod section, this is a non-crit build. And this is partially because Yujin just has horrible base crit stats. So we don't really care about these stats values. And taking them as negative values is perfect because, well, we're already basically min crit rate and min crit damage. So it doesn't really affect the build at all. And then next is max MP. Now, max MP may sound a little bit weird here, but that's because, as I said before, your HP is actually your consumable resource for the most part. You really won't use too much of your max MP at all in this build. So having it as a lower value doesn't hurt you at all because you'll really never run out of MP. And then finally is max shield. Now, max shield may seem also quite odd, as normally I do put this as a higher tier because I view any defense stats as fairly decent. But because you're so HP focused in this build, HP and defense are really just the only defensive values you actually need beyond, resistances. So shield works perfectly in D tier because you just don't need it at all, and even if you were to have it here, you really wouldn't get much value from it at all. And that's going to wrap up the Ancestor module. Now, hopefully, you guys can use this tier chart to determine if the mods you have are actually good or not, or if you want to go ahead and re-roll the Ancestor module. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our Arche Tree now. Now, for this one, we're going to run a fairly standard 2 Mutant Cell Arche Tree with a focus on skill power here. And we're also going to go ahead and run that gold skill power node. Now, we're able to put more of our stats into skill power here than normal builds because you don't need any of your HP or defense nodes here, since you already have 20k HP on Yujin along with a 10-second cooldown heal that heals 80% of your HP. But on the off chance you feel like that's somehow not enough defense, You can actually remove that gold skill node and move it down to defense stats at the bottom, but I recommend running the damage over the defense here because once again, you should already have enough defense stats. But the most important thing that you're going to want to get here is at least one blue and one purple skill range nodes. Now this is so you can hit that max range, working with the mods that we're already running and inversion reinforcement. This is one of the ways that you can hit max range fairly easily. And for our mutant cells that we're going to run here, we're going to be running two different ones. We are going to be running at the top Arche Chain Catalyst. This is so that you can reduce the enemy's non-attribute resistance, so you increase your damage, because as you go higher and higher in difficulty and levels of enemies, they are going to have more and more resistance, so this is just a huge buff to be able to remove some of the resistance and allow you to do a lot more damage. Now you can also technically run non-attribute cohesion, but my recommendation is Arche Chain Catalyst. And at the bottom, we're going to be running Fusion Damage Conversion. Now this is actually perfect for Yujin because he's a fusion character, as I've said before. And how this one works is the more missing HP you have, the more fusion skill power you get. And since on Yujin, we're using our HP a lot as a resource, so we're constantly dipping to kind of low values on HP. Usually you'll minimum dip to about 20% of your HP. That's why the 80% heal is so OP, is because you can constantly get back up to full. With this, you'll be able to get a lot of fusion skill power a lot of the time. Because once again, you're just going to be dipping your health kind of low, and then you'll be bumped back up. And with that, you can really utilize this, because we're using our HP as that resource. The component set you'll want to run for this build is Enlightened Mage set. And this is because with us running 90% cooldown, we can spam out our abilities fairly quickly, allowing us to get the 3 stacks pretty consistently for this set, which gives us an additional 84% additive non-attribute skill power, which is pretty much the highest skill power you can get from a component set for any non-attribute character. So we're definitely going to run that. And for your substats on this, you're going to want, the only ones that matter for you will be max HP, health recovery modifier, and defense. Now we want the HP there so that we can more easily hit that 20k HP that we're trying to hit to get our 40% cooldown from Yujin's passive. The HP recovery modifier is just going to help you recover your HP a little bit better with your 4th ability. And then the defense is just so you're a little bit beefier, because with you using your HP as a resource in this build, enemies hitting you are going to drain that resource a lot faster, so having a little bit extra defense just helps slow down the enemies draining your health before, you activate your 4th ability and just heal back up to full. Now for your cores in this build, you're going to want to run 4 max HP cores, and you want them all to be gold so you can hit that 20k HP. Now this will give you a little bit of leniency. It'll actually be like closer to, it'll be a little bit under 22k HP with this build, but you really want to hit the gold ones just so you can get the maximum of HP possible. And then for your blue cores, you're going to want to run 2 defense, and then your other 2 will be free slots that you can change based on what you're fighting. So if you're fighting fire enemies, you can run fire resistance. If you're running toxic enemies, you can run toxic cores. Or you could just run 4 defense cores if you just want a good general set. The reactor we're going to want for this build is a fusion non-attribute reactor, because Yujin is a fusion non-attribute character with this build, and all of his abilities scale off fusion. And for our substats, what we're going to want is we're going to want either fusion skill power or non-attribute skill power. And then for our second stat, we're going to want cooldown. Now that cooldown will bump you from about 88% cooldown to 90% cooldown, so that's how we hit our max. There is a note I'll make here though. You can actually, instead of running that cooldown, run both fusion and non-attribute skill power if you are fine with just having 88% cooldown instead of 90% cooldown. That's an optional thing you guys can decide for yourself. I really like the 90% cooldown in my build, but if you want the extra damage, it really only changes all your cooldowns by about 1 second. The weapon we'll be running for this build is Peacemaker. Now this is because of Peacemaker's passive, that every time you use a fusion or dimension ability, you get stacking non-attribute skill power, which is perfect for Yujin, Because with the transient mod we're running, we're actually going to be fusion on attribute, as I've stated before. Now, luckily, if you are doing the kind of playstyle I do, where I'm just only using abilities, you actually only need to run 3 sprint cores and 1 module, and that's Defense Master. And you don't need to really run anything else. Anything else is just optional. I'm running Defense Master here, by the way, just so you can get a little bit extra defense every once in a while to have better survivability. Because especially with you having so much HP, that defense is going to go a lot further. And then the sprint cores are just purely there to make you run around the map faster. The other note that I want to make with Peacemaker here, with this Yujin build, is technically a couple of Yujin's abilities to actually amplify gun damage. And because of that, if you want to, you can instead run a more DPS heavy Peacemaker to, get a little bit more DPS out. Now, because you'll be spamming a lot of skills, you probably won't be able to get too many shots off, but you'll probably be able to get at least a few off, which will just slightly increase that DPS. And it's finally time for the tips and tricks section. If you guys remember back at the beginning of the video, I mentioned there's a mechanic with Yujin that if you don't know about, you lose a significant amount of your damage. And actually testing earlier, I realized you lose about 2/3 of your damage. And we also went over this a little bit in the trigger module section. But this unique interaction affects Yujin's first ability. And just a quick explanation of it, and we'll show examples and everything so you guys can get the whole gist of it. Basically, unlike normal abilities, which update their stats as you get buffs, Yujin's first ability doesn't. Instead, Yujin's first ability only copies your current values. It never updates until you deactivate and reactivate it. For example, if you were to activate it, and then somewhere in the middle of you having it active, you get a 50% increase of skill power, your damage value with your turret would not increase until you deactivate and reactivate the turret. Now, if you had that at the very beginning of the buff, though, or the ability, and let's just say you had that 50% increased skill power, it would stay on your turret the entire time, even if you lost that buff, which this allows us to do some really, really cool interactions. Now, just to show like a quick example, let's do this. So we have a cyclic amplifier going. You guys can see we have 2.7 mil damage here. And it's actually not changing at all, even though we're cycling off our fusion, because it's copied that original value. So now we deactivate this, just get my health back. I don't want to activate my buff. And look at that, 2.2. And even now, if we cycle back to our fusion buff, which will just happen here in a second, it won't actually change the value at all. It'll once again stay consistent because it's not updating. It only copies that initial value. And this happens no matter what. If you guys noticed, I wasn't holding Peacemaker, because there's a cool interaction I'll show you with Peacemaker. So let's go ahead and stack this up. Get the full stacks going. And boom. So the other thing is, so we get 4.3 million here. And because it copied your initial values, and you also see it copied our components buff too, even though that dropped off. And see, everything is dropping off there, it will not get rid of that value. In fact, if we restack this, here we go. And we'll fully swap off the gun. It doesn't change it. Meaning this allows you to do cool things with Yujin here, that you can just stack up your Peacemaker if you only want to stack up your turret, and then be able to use your gun as a secondary damage if you don't want to spam your third ability, even though your third ability does a lot of damage. And this, once again, just allows Yujin to do a lot of cool things. But if, once again, you don't stack up your buffs completely here, you just get no damage. But if you allow all your buffs to stack fully, let's see, it should be here in a second, stops our fusion. 6.1 mil. Compared to before, we were only getting about 2.2. So once again, it's a little bit under 2/3 of your damage that you'll lose. And this is just the unique interaction I wanted to show you guys. This is a very important interaction once again to know, because you will lose a significant portion of your damage. So once again, just to reiterate it, your first ability, and only your first ability, copies your current stats and will not update them until you deactivate and reactivate it. Now, the one nice thing is, I believe I stated this earlier in the video, is because we have such low cooldown, even if your first turret activation doesn't get perfect stats, you can just deactivate and reactivate at the time you have all those buffs going. And this is a nice thing about running that 90% cooldown, is you don't have to worry about the first try with your turret getting the perfect buffs. If, let's just say, your cyclic amplification isn't on fusion at the beginning, that's fine. You can just deactivate it and then reactivate it when it gets there. Also, the other interaction I wanted to show you guys was when you jump on your bike, your turret does deactivate. But once again, that's fine because 90% cooldown. Anyways, that's all I wanted to show you guys here in the tips and tricks section. And let's go ahead and wrap it up for this Yujin Build video. Now, I've been having a lot of fun with this build. I think they really did nail kind of the summoner-esque class / turret class with this one. But let me know what you guys thought of the build down in the comments below the video, or if you have any questions, go ahead and hit me up down there as well. And if you did like the video or plan to use the build, I would really appreciate you hitting that like button. It does help the video a lot. And if you want to be notified when any new videos come out, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Also, I do stream almost every day on Twitch at 1 PM PST. If you guys want to go chat for Descendant, you can hit me up there as well. And once again, if you could hit that like button, I would really appreciate it. It does help the video a lot, get out to more people on YouTube. And that's going to go ahead and wrap up this video. I appreciate you all watching, and I'll catch you all again next time.